again. This is Grant Swartzwelder, and welcome to another episode of The Grown-Up Table. Today we're going to be talking about value. I know that seems like a strange topic, but it'll all come together once we have our very special guest talk about it. But we're going to be talking about how it's defined, how do you determine expectations for it, and how, if you miss the mark on value, what does that do to a consumer and to the market? So let's set the table. There's been several things in the last couple of weeks that caused me to think about value and wanting to have a podcast on it. First one was I went to the supermarket and picked up a bag of chips and found that the volume inside the bag, even though it's the same price, has shrunk. So they're trying to make their same amount of money by selling you less. Second thing, I went to the dentist. And all of a sudden, after years of going every 6 months, they decided I needed to go every 3 months. And I needed fluoride treatment. Well, as you can tell, I'm old enough that fluoride treatment's not going to help this. But they're looking to upsell, to cross-sell, to add to the overall ticket. And then the third thing is I reread Carl Sewell's book on Customer for Life. And it talked about how do you maintain a customer? How do you grow a customer? How do you do that through providing value? Now, his answer is through customer service. But so all of those things talk about value in slightly different ways, but I think they're all very important. And today we have a fantastic guest that's going to be able to answer all of this for us. Eric Bierbrier has huge marketing experience with Neiman's, with Brinker, is founder and president of EBMD Solutions. You would think I could remember that, but I couldn't. So, but I'm been so looking forward to talking to you about this, Eric. He is, if you go back and look in our history of the podcast, he also did a fantastic one on branding and how creating the brand for a customer is very similar to how you create a brand for yourself. And so I urge you, if you like what you hear today, to not only send this to other people, but also to go back and look at that other podcast. So with that, Eric, enough of me talking. This is about you. So let's talk about first, what is value? How do you define it? How should we be looking at value? And then we'll kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to come on
again. This is great.
The weather is what it is, so we're inside and it's air conditioned,
there you go.
Which makes it nice.
Well, I'm kind of run a big time outfit where I like actually do it inside with air conditioning. Yeah. So that's me.
It works. When we started talking about the subject, I really thought about three key things. What is value? And how do other people's and your own values? And it's interesting that one letter can change the context of a conversation and an experience. The second part was, how do companies who have values communicate that in their market, both internally and externally, right? And an example could be Neiman Marcus with Fortnite. I remember Mr. Stanley once saying, if it's not right for us and then it's not right for the customer, then it's not right for us. Kind of this circle that if you only do it for yourselves or if you only do it for them, it just isn't kind of work its way through the universe.
In other words, looking at understanding your consumer, understanding the other person to be able to figure out what the value is and make sure it's right for them.
Right, because the third component are your frontline people. The frontline people are always part of that communication. And those organizations that fail to see that or don't put enough effort in teaching that and making it part of the core values, right, lose out. An example, I stayed at the Four Seasons. They knew who we were before we got there. My wife loves drinking Diet Dr. Pepper, and we were there for 2 nights. I had mentioned it in a previous, we had 2 cans in the room when we arrived.
It's amazing little things like that. There was I think you sent me something talking about hotel experiences and the little things as opposed to the big things.
Right. And then how do organizations who have it maintain it and in some cases lose it? And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move on in this conversation today.
So let's dig again a little deeper on what is value. And I want you to talk a little bit more about values and dig into that a little bit more, because I think that is an interesting take on that. So to me, it seems like the definition of value will vary from customer to customer. Somewhat large volume of food, somewhat high quality, little. But how do you figure that out so that you are properly presenting your product or your presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so if you think about the value of a dining experience,
Sure.
some restaurants or some fast food provide all the components, oftentimes more, as you've discussed, than you would possibly need at that moment in time. Um, Walking away with a 40 or $50 check is not a great value to a lot of people. And then contrast that to a great night out with your wife celebrating something. $250 may not be a unreasonable amount for the value that they brought to your table and to the experience. I like to think about values coming from my parents. My father was a great salesman. The mentors that I've worked for and under, and the coaching that I've been able to provide to my clients. But contrast that to sports. And I always like to use analogies that the coach that taught you how to hit a golf ball, the coach that taught you how to run track. I played hockey, and the coach that taught me how to make sure that I put all my effort in to a practice so that when it was game time, we could actually excel at all the learnings that we've had.
Well, just as a personal aside, the coach that taught me how to hit a golf ball, I did not receive a lot of value for that based on how I hit. So we'll talk about that later. But well, and tied with all that value is expectations, because if you're going into something with a certain expectation, it seems like that would alter your sense of value.
Absolutely. You think about 25 years ago, your neighbor might have recommended a mechanic to fix your car or someone to fix your roof. Because our social influence is so embedded in our decision process and making, we have moved from learning and sharing to tasking. I always say in our business, we move from strategies to tactics.
Right.
Think about, someone who is looking for a new car, how difficult that experience is when you don't have someone with the expertise. So looking at the social media and looking at your kind of word of mouth are two important pieces that people are using now more than ever to help make smarter, poor decisions. In the wine industry, I always said there's plenty of wine to look at and to taste, but find out what you really love and then go out and seek that.
It's always good to hammer on airline industry. That's an easy target. But when we talk about expectation, I think it's really appropriate because, like, when you would go to Southwest Airlines in the old days, it was kind of a cattle car, but you knew it. Your expectations for your experience was a certain thing, and so they built it around there. Well, now it's changed. Where now they hammer you on bags. The whole experience is different, but your expectations they had already created. So it seems like there's a mismatch, and personally, I think that's why my thought on Southwest has changed. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. We think about the baseline for the relationship that you formed with Southwest Airlines
Mhm.
and how that has completely changed, right? They've taken a 180 on what they're looking for as important clues and cues. Those values that were set in place by the original founders. I was sitting at a gate not too long ago, and this fellow had 38 years as a pilot. He said, "It's not the same airline that Herb had developed, had created." I said, "Yeah, we were talking about donuts in the morning," and he laughed. He said, "Now you are a lifer." And I do remember the back and forth seats on the 4:30 flights back from
Mhm.
Houston. There were things that they did differently, their point of difference, right? The ability to be able to communicate that to a broad audience, and more importantly, to their core users, has kind of diminished for the top line or bottom line. And you had mentioned American Airlines, the same kind of issues that I've had. I've been a member of the Admirals for 42 years. They sent me a
Wow.
postcard without even a drink coupon. I thought, wow, you really value my commitment to you by not providing something. And I'm telling the story for probably the 8th time, and I hope someone from American
I know.
Airlines,
So American
yeah,
Airlines, take note.
yeah,
He
take
needs a drink
a drink.
coupon. So it's
Yeah.
so, and if you get one, then you got to
Well, I'm
share
asking for two now.
the
Yeah,
two,
two
please.
would be good.
So it's obviously that was a trade-off between either top line and I would think bottom line, since that's really what creates value, versus customer perception or customer loyalty. And so they've made that decision that whatever they might lose in customer loyalty, they'll make up for in the uh, profitability. Is that the right way to think about
Yeah,
it?
that is a one-dimensional view. And I would always kind of argue that unless you have the customer and your employees, your stakeholders, if you will, involved in those decisions and being able to articulate that, oftentimes the manager or someone in a restaurant will say, oh, they discontinued that. It wasn't very popular. Well, Mrs. Jones really liked that dish, and she came every week with her husband
Yep.
for that dish. So,
But you can't keep that dish just for Miss Jones. So you do have to balance it between, your kitchen spread and operations versus a certain number of customers.
absolutely. And so the teachable point of view in that case is the server could say, Mrs. Jones, I know you love chicken with cheese. We've introduced a new item, and I'd like for you to enjoy it tonight. If you don't, we know you'll come back. I'm just going to take it off your bill, right? So provide a way that that server, that manager, that flight attendant has a dialogue, a piece of information that doesn't put them 6 inches underground when that person has that dialogue.
Yeah, and I think it's those little things like you alluded to about the hotel and all, where that little thing of giving a free meal to a loyal customer could end up creating a much more loyal customer for quite some time. That little investment in a Diet Dr. Pepper, in a free meal.
Yeah, nothing is
Great
free,
value.
but think about how much it costs to acquire any new customer in any business. I would venture to say selling or giving a $4 piece of chicken has incredible return. And you mentioned Carl Sewell, customers for life.
Well, explain that whole value, or the value of the customer, the cost of customer retention versus customer um, origination. Because I agree with you, but explain that a little bit more of what we're talking about monetarily, marketing, attention span.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So if you take the formula of money and time and you add values, your values and the organization that you're trading at, and divide it by the value of the ticket, whether you're buying a $60,000 car at Sewell, whether you're spending $15 at Chick-fil-A, right? The values of those two organizations shine through all their employees, right? Their messaging, at Chick-fil-A, it's community, right? They don't just hire people for warm bodies. They hire people that can look you in the eye and say, thank you, right? Thank you for coming today. We welcome you to come back. Sewell will send you a birthday card 20 years after you've purchased your last car, just to remind you that they're there when you're ready, right? And so the full circle is making sure that they know that their time and money is of value to you.
So from that, I'm almost hearing you say that values are the most, I don't know, most important, but kind of you first have to identify that, and then the value comes later.
I think so. I think spending $600 for a hotel room that people know who you are and are excited to see you versus $150 at a hotel that just takes your money and swipes your credit card is of value to people that want to spend time in a place with a loved one that they want to share, that this is a great experience together.
Do you think that you mentioned dollars, 600 versus 150? it seems like you have to add more value to get 600, that people are expecting that more. Again, it's a little bit Southwest. If it's a cattle call and you're paying $50, then you're okay with that. Now you're paying more, you expect more. So there is, I would think, a direct relationship between price and value expectations.
Absolutely. You mentioned Southwest. I'll just kind of switch over to JSX. JSX is a
Okay.
growing organization, flying semi-private, walk on. You have a dog, just make sure that you've got all the shots and the dog will sit by your feet. It is a more expensive alternative to American Airlines first class or Southwest up front, A level, but it's not that much more. And guess what? You walk through security, you're on a plane, and you're at your destination 3 hours earlier. So if time is one of those um, important pieces to one's life, that you're saving 3 hours of a day enjoying time in Scottsdale, Arizona, or wherever your destination
But
might
just the
be.
hassle factor of not going through security, not being mushed in with everybody waiting to board your plane. So there's a whole lot of probably additional
Right.
items there too.
So
So
where does hassle kind of fit into value and values? I look at it as I like a good cup of coffee. I don't think spending $9 is a good value, but I do like going to a place that the server or the barista or the person is confident and competent in their skill set, warm and inviting. And so if it costs me $4, that's a whole lot more value to my experience than necessarily going to a more fancy coffee house. And I know people will kind of argue that the beans are different. I value small businesses as much as I do large businesses,
mhm.
as long as they treat me with the opportunity to have a relationship, and an ongoing relationship is most important for people, I think, in this day and age.
You bring up coffee and I think of Starbucks, and then I'm gonna throw you for a loop because I didn't tell you we were gonna talk about this, but every time I go there, they give me the opportunity to give them a tip for basically handing me a coffee. That seems like that fits into value, values, expectation. This whole tip society, that where they're wanting even more money to do basically what they've always been doing, which is just handing the food through the window or the coffee through the window. Do you think that tip environment, that tip mentality, how does that affect value and customers?
You know, we didn't talk about it, but I looked down at some information I had from 20 years ago, and it had talked about consumer segmentation, people that were actually in the market spending money. And we had about three generations. We had boomers, we had Gen kind of Zs, and Xs. We now have five generations and a sixth coming up, Alpha, B,
Hmm.
that are spending money. Young people are spending money with organizations that they feel kin to. We talked about Starbucks. There's La La Land, and La La Land is selling a $8 cup of coffee, but those individuals that are using it feel part of their community. And so I don't think that they're concerned about the upcharge on a tip. But for me, I'm like the same kind of commentary as you shared. You know, you just handed me something. In my day and age, that was part of the transaction. You got paid by your employer.
It's interesting that you call it an upcharge because we're going to talk about upselling and cross-selling, but that's really all it is because the what they've done for you isn't any different. They're just now wanting more money for it.
Yeah, I think they're
So
substituting, some profitability or some P&L number by asking the customer to do something that was not part of the traditional transaction. So for someone of our generation, to me, that rubs me the wrong way.
yeah, well, it does me up as well. So you were doing something a second ago that I want to continue, which is comparing different companies, the JSX to the Southwest, Sewell to say AutoNation. We can go through a variety, but you've had some interesting thoughts on that of how do you compare and how, especially as it relates to value and values and You got some examples you want to describe on that?
Well, I bought my wife a used car for her birthday, and um, I thought I was buying her an iron pot, but it turns out iron and cars are both made
They're
of
both
iron, and
metal. There you go.
6 year anniversary. Um, and we went to several dealers to look at specific cars, specific model, but each experience was different. One was very much, what do we have to do to kind of sell you this today? Another was, if I sell you this at the price you're asking, will you buy the extra insurance and the 4-year warranty? A third was, we have additional paint coverage on that. That's on top of. And then we went to a dealer that said, here's the price. If you don't want to discuss this, we're not going to put you in a room with that heavy-handed finance manager who's
Right.
making money 3 points on the loan origination. And at the end of the day, all the cars were nice, but the one car that she selected was the one where we had the least amount of internal confrontation, right? People in this day and age have less time to feel boxed into a corner, right? It's like having a cat that's not happy with their meal selection.
So do you think that hassle factor issue, kind of like you described it in the airline and then here in the auto, is that becoming a bigger driver of what value is?
Yeah, I think whether you go to a restaurant, I'll use an example from the wine industry. When you go out to Napa or Sonoma or Willamette Valley, if you go to a great tasting where the individual, the winemaker, or the people in the chalet or the tasting room are pouring for you with passion, and listening to what you really want out of the experience, you're going to walk away and go, yeah, that was $100 for the tasting, but we got 2 great bottles that they're going to ship to us for free. They had a cheese kind of board in front of us so that we could taste different cheeses from the region. Those are values that the organization has put forth for their consumer or for their guest. And hopefully it's their customer for life.
And kind of another take on that hassle is when we were talking earlier about, when you sell wine and, you offer 10 where someone offers 30, or I go to a restaurant and they have a 2-page menu versus the Cheesecake Factory that has a 50-page. In a way, that's another way of talking about hassle factor and decision factor. And it seems like that could, I don't know, does that fit to value, talk to value, or is it just talk to just making, well, it makes it easier for the consumer to make a decision. So in a way, that's value.
Yeah, I think, what you point out is sort of this guest satisfaction kind of quote,
Okay.
right? And if it takes 20 minutes to get your food at a Cheesecake Factory because it took 8 minutes for you to order and it took them 7 minutes for them to cook it.
It's a more
Right.
complicated kitchen.
It's a more
because of all-
complicated kitchen. And so I think restaurants that simplify things are far more able to retain customers and, as important, bring back new customers. You've got to fill the funnel in any organization that we're running in this day and age with new trial. And trial is, as we talked about, a very difficult thing in a very complicated and messy world that we live in.
But then that does create higher expectation. You only have 2-page menu, that better be good food. Or if you're only selling 10 bottles, they better be pretty good, because the expectation, if you're focused, you have higher quality.
Absolutely. Well, I think curation, and if you go back to the original Neiman Marcus or the original Container Store, we didn't have 50,000 items, right? Costco does a great job selling 400 items. 100 of them change frequently. And their business model is built on repeat transactions. And transactions come from people showing up at the store every Tuesday or every other Tuesday to see what's new on the floor.
So let's talk about my issue with my dentist in trying to upsell me, because it's a little interesting take, but I do believe that talks about value and maybe kind of hurting the customer experience and then lowering the value, where it's kind of linked a little bit with your upcharge idea as well. But seems like in today's world, I'm having more and more people upselling me on services, on the type of product, and it kind of in a way fits into what we talked about on the hassle factor also, because now I'm having to like question and understand and think. And I guess one way is not to and just say go for it, and then I end up with a much bigger bill. But are you seeing more upselling or upcharging? And how does that fit into value creation, expectation?
Yeah, I mean, a dentist, getting new tires for your car.
Yeah,
All these are transactions that used to be functional. Your dry cleaning,
pretty black and white.
you
You go
drop it
get it.
off. And I think oftentimes they're trying so hard to make sure that they don't lose that one opportunity sell. Um, the dentist asking every time that you need more X-rays. We haven't
Mhm.
had X-rays. My teeth haven't changed in 10 years. I may have a filling every now and then, but
Right.
it just it leads me to believe that they're not looking out for or not talking to the customer in the context of their guest, their customer. Um, I had two experiences with tires on my truck. It took 3 hours for them to tell me that they didn't have two of the tires
Oh,
available and that they'd be available next Tuesday. I didn't go back for the other two tires,
yeah.
right? They wasted my time. And I'm telling you the story, and I've told it again 6 times. But they could have said that at the front end and used that opportunity to say, next Tuesday, you're going to be here at 9 a.m. and we're going to have it in 45 minutes. And that's all they could have said, and I would have been back.
So is that in that example, is that a values kind of circling back, is that a values issue, or is that just a lack of training? And maybe because you don't have the values, you don't do the training.
I think the value of people's time is not looked at in the context of the customer. They're running around, they're trying to figure out, to serve all these individuals who are trying to get a simple transaction. I would go back to the um, the functionality. We talk about process and discipline. Neither one of those examples had process or discipline. The dentist should have said or could have said before you got there, right? It's been 3 years since we've taken X-rays or we've seen you. Our recommendation as professionals is to see you more frequently. Would 6 months, 4 months, or a year be best for your particular situation? Right now gives you an opportunity to say, every year is fine, right?
Mhm.
Every year is fine for me. I don't want to be told every 3 months, you're missing an opportunity to save your teeth. That's your decision,
Right.
not theirs.
When my fear is that medical others, they use their professional respect to push you in subtly and sometimes not so subtly into certain decisions. Because if someone is going to that you respect as a knowledgeable will say you need this, you're probably going to do that. So how do you know, I don't know, I'm still ranting about my dentist issue. So it's like, how do you figure out what that value is and whether they're doing it to make money or because they've got your best interest in mind?
Okay, so let's kind of take that question apart, and I look at it from three aspects.
I need you to try to
Yeah.
get me off my
Okay.
dentist
So
issue
let's
here.
not go to the dentist. Let's go to the dry cleaner. Another
Okay.
functional
There you go.
experience.
I can
Right?
calm down with
Well,
the
dry cleaners used to be on every corner, and you drop off your clothes, and you would hope that they gave you back some of your clothes. Oftentimes, one was missing a button,
yeah, or crushed.
or
Yeah.
or crushed.
See, now here you go again, getting me worked up now
Okay.
about that.
So a functional experience with a neighborhood kind of transaction has gotten far more complicated, right? It shouldn't be. They should say, we guarantee every shirt that comes back, all the buttons have not been broken, that it will be back on Tuesday, not on next Thursday when you showed up and you say, well, they don't have those. We had a machine go down. Customers should have the priority one step above the person at the front desk. The person at the front desk should be number two, and then the functionality of the organization should be number three. Think about how Amazon, as an example, has made it so easy that people don't even think about going elsewhere. They developed something called the one click. Click, it goes in a basket. 10 years ago, you had to use 3 or 4 different
Right.
mouse clicks to get anything. And even then, the cart never really updated. Just think about how simple or simplified, one piece of technology has allowed them to kind of leapfrog every other kind of online retailer.
That is interesting because if you look at one of the things I was going to bring up earlier in a conversation is how technology has almost created more hassle factor where you're trying to click on certain things and you have to go through all this automated AI agent and it's very painful to just get your answer. But Amazon's an example where they seem to have figured technology out and how to interface with the customer.
Yeah, little transition to another kind of stopping for gas in the city. Pretty easy, your local gas station. Try going from Dallas to Austin or Dallas to Houston, right? You have all these small towns that used to have a Shell or, another one. And then an organization comes along like Buc-ee's and says to mom, 28 miles to the next Buc-ee's. And dad's looking at the dash and going, I think we can get there. And mom's like, we better get there because I want to go to a clean restroom.
And so the hassle factor of going to a Buc-ee's, waiting 28 miles, and then the 500 gas uh, um,
Pumps,
pumps
right?
and all that, they've been able to overcome that through the value that you see with the clean restrooms, the products, the menagerie of things to see.
It takes more to go to a Buc-ee's than to just pull off on the side of
Yeah,
the road.
yeah.
And yet people are willing to do it time and time again. One of the fastest growing segments based on one simple premise. We're going to make this experience safe and it's going to be hassle-free. You want soda? We've got 500 of them. You want Bucky Bites? We've got that, right? You wouldn't think that an organization could really look at an industry, a segment, and break it down to 2 simple things. Yes, they build their own exits now off freeways.
It is amazing what they've created.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Fascinating.
Eric, thank you very much. We're out of time, but really, when you start thinking about this conversation, it's all about kind of how you perceive value and then what do you expect from other people for that value. And that can be achieved different ways. The hassle factor, the size, the volume, the price, and that's a very individual decision. But if you don't push for what you believe is value and what your expectations of that value, it sure seems like the other side of that equation, the vendor, the service provider is going to try to exploit with upselling, upcharging, and making that value even worse. So hopefully you enjoyed this conversation, a little different than what we do at the Grown Up Table, but I think hopefully you found it fascinating. If you did find it fascinating, please share with some of your friends and pass this on to others. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next time we're here at the Grown Up Table. Thank you.